Hello, everybody. Today we are talking about training your dog to be comfortable in the car. Again, last week we talked about some adjustments that you could make that don't involve really a lot of training, but more about car setup, medication, that kind of thing. What you can experiment with to see what will help your dog be more comfortable in the car, hopefully show less of whatever behaviors that are bothering you, like barking, for instance. This week, we're going to talk about training your dog to get into the car on their own. If you are watching live and you post a question under the video, wherever you're watching it, it will come up for me with a short delay. Now, I'd love to hear as I get started. I'm going to jump into the slides, and I have some example video of our returning guest star, Pancake. If you have a dog who won't even approach the car on their own, I'd love to hear about it. This is kind of where we started out, and I know how difficult it can be starting there. It seems almost insurmountable to think, oh yeah, I'm going to teach my dog to like going for car rides. But all is not lost. I'll show you what helped us, and I hope some of this will be helpful to you. All right, so loading up. How can we teach our dogs to get into the car willingly, hopefully happily? So again, who's this for? This is a repeat slide from last week. But this kind of training is for those of you who have dogs who won't get into the car at all, or once you get them in the car, they bark, howl, or maybe they throw up or pant heavily, drool, tremble, show lots of signs that we interpret to mean they're not enjoying their time in the car. They're anxious or not feeling well in some way. And this is more common than you might think. So the three pieces of car training that I'm presenting over this short series are what can you change right away? That's what we did last week. Training to load up into the car, as we're doing today. And then next week, we'll talk about training to actually go somewhere, actually drive somewhere. All right, so loading up. How can we get our dogs to get into the car? So as always, when you're deciding how to train something, you need to know what actual behaviors you want your dog to do. So depending on your dog's size and your car setup, you might just want your dog to jump in, or maybe you want them to walk up a ramp, or maybe if you have a little guy, you want to be able to pick them up and put them into the car without any struggle on either of your parts. And do you need them to get into a crate in the car, into a car seat, just into the hammock, sort of in the back? And then I added this closing the door, which isn't a dog behavior, obviously, but I'll show you it is something that we needed to deal with Pancake, because it's something you at least need your dog to tolerate, right, is having that car door closed so that you can go somewhere. All right, so Pancakes training. Of course, I can't tell you exactly what steps will work for your dog. I don't know your dog and I haven't seen them, but I'm hoping that just our process of working through this with Pancake will help you think about it more clearly with your own dog. So with Pancake, I needed him to approach the car on his own. He doesn't really like being carried, so I was trying to avoid carrying him. I wanted him to walk up a ramp to jump into the car. Again, he's small enough I could pick him up and put him in, but that's not his favorite way of being transported. So I said, okay, let's see if you can walk up the ramp to get into the car. Once he walked up the ramp, I next wanted him to put his paws up onto the car, that first step of getting into the car. Then jumping in. So this is how we broke up this process into steps, which you'll see in the video. Then actually climbing into his car seat. So last week, if you watched, you might remember that I initially tried to have Pancake in a crate when we drove. And when we got rid of the crate and tried him in with some other setups, his behavior was much better. In the crate, he barked and howled nonstop, and he seemed, he didn't do that when he wasn't in the crate in the car. So instead, we're trying a little booster seat here, which you may have seen for small dogs, and you'll see it in the video. And then I wanted him to stay in the car not try to jump out, and also not sort of flinch or jump back away when I was closing the door to the car. All right, so first let's look at approaching the car. How did I train him? Because initially he did not want to approach the car at all. How did we train him to approach the car willingly? All right, so here we are. And this is all, a lot of this is one video I had to reshoot because I couldn't find some of the original video. So this took definitely more than one day, but a lot of the video was shot in one day here. So here we are, a decent distance from the car out front. I have Pancake on a long line so that he can move relatively freely, although unfortunately, as you'll see on this large gravel we have out front, he does tend to stumble and sometimes fall over with his one little front leg, not providing the most stability. But anyway, he has the options of moving in whatever direction he wants. And I'm alternating or sort of mixing up here, reinforcing two different things. One is a hand touch, which is one of the first behaviors I ever taught him. And so it's an easy one for him. And I used it to move him both toward and away from the car. But it does, it's a way to play a fun game near the car that he knows and is comfortable with, and he knows it's a way he can get reinforcement. And then I also captured any moving toward the car that he offered. So I would always try to make sure that I gave him treats if he chose to walk toward the car. Okay, so here we're hanging out several feet from the car. He's pretty excited. And we're going back and forth. I'm not just trying to continually move closer to the car at this stage because that would be too difficult for him. Here we're walking toward the car. And you notice the leash is loose. I'm rewarding him when he gets there. I'm not luring him with food, or at least trying not to very often. I'm not pulling on the leash at all. This has to be something he is willing to do on his own. And I do a lot of either hand touch away from the car in between reps or tossing treats to move him away between repetitions. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is that it resets him so that he can again approach, and then I can reward that, because once he's at the car, he can't continue to approach it, right, unless he moves away. It also gives him some easy wins. So, you know, take a couple steps away from the car, do a quick hand touch, and you get treats. So we have, that keeps his rate of reinforcement high. And I can watch his body language repeatedly as he approaches the car and look for any signs that he's hesitating, maybe not as enthusiastic as I would like him to be. Okay, so that was just being by the car, training near the car, doing some approaches, but the door wasn't open, car wasn't on. Just the car is just that inanimate object. Next, we have the car door open now, which for many of your dogs, if they hate the car, this is going to be a bit loaded for them. It will it'll be a conditioned aversive, I guess. They'll know that an open car door could mean bad stuff coming, them having to go in the car. So we practice some of the same stuff with the car door open and his little foam ramp there in place. We're doing some hand touch, but not right next to the car. And I'm doing some treat tosses to sometimes move him farther away. Here, he chose to walk toward the car, so I made sure to reinforce that, or to give him treats anyway, hopefully reinforce it. A treat toss away to move him away from the car. And then here I asked for a hand touch, and he ignored me and walked toward the car. And I was like, well, walking toward the car is the more important behavior here, so I'll definitely give him a treat for that. So hand touch can be handy for moving the dog in a particular direction. So I did use that some, but use it carefully. Don't try to get your dog to move closer than they really are willing to. So you're going to be watching for signs. If you do this kind of training, you'll need to work with your own trainer and possibly your veterinarian or veterinary behaviorist. But often if a dog kind of bulks or takes a long time deciding whether or not they want to do something that normally they would do this behavior readily, that might suggest that you're asking them to do something that they're not entirely comfortable with. All right, so that was approaching the car, just go near the car. Now I needed him to walk up the ramp. And this ramp was something he was already comfortable with because he uses these little ramps to get on and off our sofas. So it wasn't a new piece of equipment. Here I just used, I think, a food lure to get a foot on, his front foot on. And then I'm going to give him a couple treats for hanging out there. I think I kind of used I patted the seat or something and then gave him a treat. Again, patted the seat, he jumped up, took a step up. I rewarded him for that. And then I give him another treat for staying there. And here, I am putting treats also on the seat. So if he does choose to go farther up there, he's going to immediately encounter food. I think, and there again, I reset him, toss a treat away so he gets off the ramp so we can practice getting on the ramp again. And here I use a little bit of a food lure to get those back feet on the ramp. So that was kind of the last step. Front foot on the ramp obviously had to come first, and then we needed to get his back feet up also. All right, once he was readily getting on the ramp, all of his 3 feet, 3 paws, now I needed him to put his paws up on the car as the first step toward actually jumping up there. And I don't actually have that many examples of these because as soon as he was comfortable doing this, he started jumping into the car, which I'll show you. But so here he is on his little ramp, and there he puts his little unsteady little front paw up. And I'm rewarding him there in that position. And he can always get down, and there are actually some treats on the driveway, so he can go get treats down there if he wants. And I'm actually not cueing him here. This is just, he's been rewarded so many times at this point for going up the ramp that when he gets off the ramp, he turns around and comes right back up on his own. All right, so jumping in was the next one. And this was kind of a big deal for Pancake because, well, one, it's for any dog who's afraid of the car, right? You're asking them to get into the car where historically bad stuff happens. They feel scared or nauseated or whatever it is that bothers them in the car. It's also pretty effortful behavior, especially for Pancake. My ramp, I've tried a few different ramps now, and hopefully we'll find one that's easier for him to use. That little foam wedge doesn't actually go up that high, so he has to jump, as you'll see. But what I did here is I've been rewarding him, as you saw, for coming up on the ramp and then putting his front foot on the car. I also have been tossing treats into the car so that they were there if he jumped up, and sort of his encouragement or motivation to get him to jump up. Oop, so there he goes. He almost fell over backwards, but he did it. And so I made sure there's a ton of food in the car at that point. So he got heavily rewarded for getting in the car. So here I'm just using food. I'm just tossing food. He chooses to get up, get in. He gets the food. And eventually I dispensed with the food lures, and here I'm just tapping. I'll still give him treats when he gets into the car, but I'm just tapping the seat, and he got much better at jumping in. And then he got a lot of food in the car. Okay, so depending on what your dog is riding in the car, this may or may not be applicable to you. Like I said, we had dispensed with the crate because that didn't help matters. It made Pancake's behavior is worse in the crate than without a crate in the car. But I wanted something to kind of contain him and something with a tether. So I was experimenting with this booster seat, and I wanted him to climb in on his own because, like, as I've mentioned, he doesn't love that invasive handling of someone picking him up. So this ended up being a little bit of a fiasco, but it may be helpful to you. So I'm going to show you what happened anyway. So here's his car seat. It's quite cushy. It's got pretty tall sides, and I selected this because, well, for one reason, because he likes beds with sides like this. And so I wanted something that he might naturally enjoy being in based on what I knew about him. And it has built-in like ways to secure it to the seat and a built-in tether, actually a couple tethers. But I wanted to first teach him to get into it and settle in it and like it in the house before I put it in the car. So here it is in the house, and there's just treats in there. And he started to climb in, not super gracefully at first, but he did succeed. And then I worked on putting that on cue. I didn't go into this a lot of detail in this week's video, but if you want more, if there are a lot of people interested, I could always do a full video on this. If you watched our hiking pack video, training to go into a hiking pack, it's somewhat similar, and you could go back and watch that. It's on our blog. But basically, I tossed treats in at first, and he would climb in to get them. And then instead of tossing treats in, I would tap it or point to it with my hand like you just saw, and then reward him or give him treats when he got in. And then eventually I would just point, which I think is here. I'm just pointing toward it, and he knows that means to get into his car seat. All right, so once he was getting in readily in the house, and I actually had it out quite a lot. And anytime he chose to get in it and settle down, I would make sure to give him treats because I wanted him to really like this car seat. Then we decided, okay, let's work on it in the car. And this is where things don't look quite as pretty. As it turns out, it's much more difficult for him. And I don't know if it's the angle or like jumping off of a soft surface like the car seat versus, the seat of the car versus the floor in the house. But he can do it. He can get into the car seat from inside the car like this, but it looks more like a face plant than a hop into it. So ultimately, I ended up helping him in most of the time in practice. He can do it, but you see, not like doesn't look super comfortable. So kind of a belly flop into the seat. So we did work on this, but in the end, in practice, I ended up giving him a little bit of a hand in so that he doesn't end up falling on his face that way. All right. So now we've covered all these other things: approaching the car, walking up the ramp, putting your paws on the car seat, jumping into the car, climbing into that car seat, which he is now doing with assistance since I don't want him to face plant. You may not have to worry about this door closing, like having your dog stay put while the car door is closed. But I discovered early on that Pancake was pretty scared of me closing that door. He would get in happily, wagging tail, looking good. I closed the door and I saw him leap back away from the door. Like it really startled him. So I needed to put in a little bit of work on this. Okay, so here he is in the car, and my criteria for this was, for reinforcing him, was I wanted him to not flinch or jump back. And so if he did that, I would make it easier. And I had to do a little experimentation to figure out what degree of car door closing could he tolerate, that he seemed to be okay with. He wouldn't sort of jump back or flinch away from it. And I had to start with just moving the car door a tiny bit. And he did quite well with this as soon as I broke it down into small pieces. I would at first be moving it only a few inches at a time. And then, doing a large, sort of going through a larger number of degrees, I guess, of closing per treat and in one go. When I first closed the door, then in the training, I just closed it the last few inches there, softly as I could. He's peeking out like, where's my stuff? Before going to a more real life door closing. But at this point, I didn't spend too long on this really, but it was worth the time because he now doesn't seem to be bothered, doesn't jump away when the door closes. Okay, does anyone have questions about the training thus far, getting the Pancake to approach the car, climb in, get in his little car seat, close the door? If you do, post it below the video and I'll watch for questions. I wanted to discuss one of the toughest parts of car training, toughest aspects, which reminds me a little bit, anyone who's working on separation anxiety with your dog, it reminds me a little bit of this. In separation anxiety, you are often counseled to avoid any absences that are longer than what you're training for at the moment, which can be very difficult when you're trying to, live your life and need to go places. And the same can be true of car training. So you're doing all this careful training, trying to convince your dog that it's worth their while and a good thing to approach and get into the car. You can imagine how it might really tank your training if in between all those careful training sessions, you just toss them in the car and do a drive that, scares the crap out of them, basically. That could totally undo all of your training. So what the heck, how are we supposed to deal with this? And why do we need to avoid these non-essential car rides? So if your dog's afraid in the car or nauseated, you already know that they are suffering when they're in the car, and we don't like our dogs to suffer. So that's one reason not to take them on rides they're not ready for. It also kind of cements the relationship even further for your dog, if it's not already as strong as it can be in their minds, that the car predicts bad stuff. So if we keep subjecting our dogs to stressful car rides while we're trying to do this careful car training, we're going to be fighting against those all those instances in which your dog has, that relationship, car predicts bad stuff, confirmed for them and strengthened over and over. It also can risk punishing behaviors that you want. So say you spent a week working on getting your dog to willingly approach the car and hop in, and you've been reinforcing carefully with lots of high value treats, and then, I got to take them to the vet. They walk to the car, jump in, you close the door and drive them to the vet. There's a good chance you've now punished that approaching and jumping into the car behavior that you've been working so hard to build. Because instead of, even if you gave them treats, they had a stressful car ride and never mind whatever happened at the vet's office. And finally, you also risk reinforcing unwanted behaviors, anything that might cause or, even be correlated with a delay to getting into the car or ending the car ride. So say your dog can tell there are cues that let them know, this isn't a training session, this is a real life car ride, and they balk or pancake, try not to get to the car, and that does delay them getting into the car. Those behaviors may well be reinforced by the delay to getting into the car. And then if your dog is barking or howling in the car, and then of course at some point you have to stop driving because you reach your destination, the barking and howling could be negatively reinforced by the end of the car ride. So that's yet another reason not to push your dog and take them on rides they're not ready for. They can suffer. We don't want them to suffer. They can learn repeatedly the car is terrible. You could risk punishing any behaviors you like that happen to be happening, and all the behaviors you don't like barking and howling, may well be further reinforced. Okay, so what are you supposed to do? Because sometimes you do have to go places, right? This is something to talk with your vet about, vet or a veterinary behaviorist. What we do with Pancake, we did have to do some long car rides, unfortunately, before he was ready for them. We truly did not have a choice about it. So we worked extensively with our veterinarian to look at different combinations of anti-nausea and anti-anxiety medications to find the best combination that would make the ride as pleasant as possible, or at least minimize how unpleasant it was for Pancake. We took that in combination with all the other sort of aspects of the car and the car ride that we talked about last week, like the car setup, where in the car was Pancake, was he contained or not, did he have exercise beforehand, that kind of thing, just to try to minimize the damage these long car rides would have on our training. All right, so we have talked about what you can change right away to make car rides less terrible. That was last week's topic. Today, training to load up, get your dog into the car. Next week, we are going to talk about the process of, now you've got your dog in the car, how can you start introducing actually driving somewhere? What behaviors do you want to try to reinforce? How can you reinforce them? Of course, as always, I can't tell you exactly what to do for your own dog because I don't know your dog, but I'll show you what has worked for Pancake where we've been able to make progress and where we've run into trouble and what we did about it. All right, so that was today. That is next week. All right, so if you're not already in our free Facebook support group, you are more than welcome to join us. That's facebook.com/groups/dogkindsupport. If you have any questions about car training in general or training your dog to get into the car in particular, please go ahead and post them now. And if I see any questions before I sign off, I'll answer them live. And if not, if you post a question under this when you watch it as a recording, I'll still get an alert, and I'll do my best to reply to you in a timely manner. All right. So I hope that many of you watching today don't have this problem and your dog will get into the car willingly. But if not, I hope this gives you some ideas. You could bring the video to your trainer you're working with and talk about what to do with your own dog. All right, let me put my face on here. Okay, all right, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's always nice to see some people joining live. I will be back next week to talk about the driving portion of teaching your dog to enjoy being in the car. And like I said, if you have any questions, go ahead and post them underneath the video, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. All right, have a wonderful week, everyone.